Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Perfect Facade. Douglas Ritter adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, catching his reflection, strong jawline, piercing blue eyes that had seen too much during his 15 years as a homicide detective, and prematurely gray hair that Victoria always said made him look distinguished. At 42, he thought he'd finally found peace after retiring from the force 3 years ago to focus on his family and his private security consulting business. "Daddy, you look handsome." 8-year-old Emma bounced down the stairs in her school uniform, her blonde curls, inherited from Victoria, dancing around her shoulders. She was the light of his life, the reason he'd left the darkness of criminal investigation behind. "Thank you, Princess." Douglas scooped her up, spinning her around until she giggled. "Ready for the parent-teacher conference?" Victoria glided into the room, a vision in her cream-colored dress that hugged her curves perfectly. At 36, she was still the stunning woman who'd captured his heart 5 years ago when she was working as a pharmaceutical sales representative. Her green eyes sparkled with what he thought was love, but lately, something felt different, distant. "Let me fix your collar," she said, her manicured fingers adjusting his shirt. Her touch felt cold, clinical. "You know how important these meetings are for Emma's future." Douglas had built his life on reading people, on detecting lies and uncovering truth. It's what made him one of the best detectives in the city before he retired. But with Victoria, he deliberately turned off that part of his brain. He wanted to trust, to love without suspicion. Maybe that was his first mistake. During the drive to Emma's school, Victoria seemed unusually tense, constantly checking her phone and glancing in the rearview mirror. When Douglas asked about it, she claimed it was work stress from her new job at a medical equipment company. "Mommy gets lots of important calls," Emma chimed in from the back seat. "Sometimes she talks in different voices to different people. It's like she's playing pretend." Victoria's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Emma, sweetie, adults sometimes have to use professional voices for different clients. It's nothing exciting." Douglas filed away Emma's innocent observation. Professional voices, or something else? The meeting with Mrs. Lynn Gill went smoothly at first. Emma was excelling academically, showing remarkable intelligence and creativity. But Douglas noticed the teacher's growing discomfort as the conversation progressed, her eyes frequently shifting to Emma, then to Victoria with barely concealed concern. "Emma is observant," Mrs. Gill said carefully. "She often shares interesting stories during show and tell about what she sees at home." Victoria's smile never wavered, but Douglas caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Children have such active imaginations. After the formal meeting ended, Victoria excused herself to use the restroom. The moment she was gone, Mrs. Gill's professional demeanor cracked. "Mr. Ritter, I need to speak with you privately. Can you come back tomorrow during my free period? It's urgent." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Victoria cooked dinner, her famous herb-crusted salmon that always left him feeling slightly drowsy afterward. She was attentive, asking about his day, discussing weekend plans, but Douglas's detective instincts were awakening from their long slumber. That night, as Victoria slept beside him, Douglas lay awake staring at the ceiling. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, the same way he used to sense when a case was about to break wide open. The question was, what was he missing? Chapter 2. The Teacher's Warning. The next afternoon, Douglas sat across from Lynn Gill in her empty classroom, watching her struggle with whatever she needed to say. At 52, she was a veteran teacher who'd seen everything, but her hands trembled as she arranged papers on her desk. "Mr. Ritter, what I'm about to tell you, it's going to sound impossible, but I've been teaching for 28 years. I know when something isn't right." Douglas leaned forward, his detective training kicking in. "Whatever it is, Mrs. Gill, I need to hear it. Emma has been talking about things, concerning things. At first, I thought it was childhood imagination, but the details are too specific, too consistent." She pulled out a folder. "I've been documenting everything she said over the past 2 months." She slid the folder across the desk. Douglas opened it to find pages of handwritten notes, each dated and detailed. September 15th. Emma mentioned Mommy's special medicine cabinet that Daddy isn't allowed to see. Said Mommy gives different pills to different people who visit. September 22nd. Drew a picture of Mommy's work friends, multiple men and women with bags of special papers. Said they come when Daddy is sleeping. October 3rd. Mentioned Mommy practicing different names in the mirror. Listed 5 different names she's heard Mommy use. Douglas's blood ran cold as he read entry after entry. Each innocent childhood observation painted a picture of something sinister happening under his own roof. There's more, Mrs. Gill continued. Emma mentioned that you sleep very deeply after dinner. That Mommy told her never to wake you because you're sick and need special rest. She also drew pictures of strangers in your house late at night. Douglas's mind raced. The drowsiness after dinner, the mysterious phone calls, Victoria's secretive behavior. It was all starting to make horrific sense. Mrs. Gill's voice dropped to a whisper. Mr. Ritter, I think your wife is drugging you. And I think she's using your home for illegal activities while you're unconscious. Emma described things no 8-year-old should know about. What kind of things? People coming in with bags and leaving with different bags. Adults crying and begging Mommy for help. Mommy counting lots of money and hiding it in places you don't know about. Mrs. Gill's voice cracked, and Emma mentioned that sometimes the people who visit look hurt, scared. She said Mommy told her they were playing a game, but Emma knows they weren't playing. Douglas felt the room spinning. His wife, the woman he loved, the mother of his child, was apparently running some kind of criminal operation from their home while keeping him drugged and unconscious. There's something else, Mrs. Gill said, her voice barely audible. Yesterday, Emma mentioned that Mommy has been asking her questions about you, about your old job, about people you arrested, about where you keep your police files from home. She's gathering information, Mr. Ritter. The pieces clicked into place with nauseating clarity. Victoria hadn't fallen in love with him. She targeted him. A former homicide detective would be the perfect cover for criminal activities. Who would suspect a cop's wife? Mrs. Gill reached across the desk and grabbed his hand. You need to go to the police. Tonight. But don't tell her you're going. Don't eat anything she prepares. And whatever you do, don't let her know that you know. Douglas stood up, his mind already formulating a plan. His detective instincts were fully awake now, and he was furious, not just at Victoria, but at himself for being so blind. Mrs. Gill, I need you to do something for me. If anything happens to Emma or me, give this folder to Detective Preston Valencia at the 15th Precinct. He's my former partner and the only person I trust completely. As he drove home, Douglas's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Dinner is in the fridge, your favorite. Love you. For the first time in months, Douglas wouldn't be eating her cooking. Tonight, he was going hunting for the truth. Chapter 3. The Police Station Revelation. Douglas sat in Detective Preston Valencia's office at 11 p.m., watching his former partner's face grow darker with each page of Mrs. Gill's documentation. Preston had been his best friend for over a decade, a solid detective with an unshakable moral compass, and the build of a linebacker who still hit the gym religiously at 45. Jesus, Doug, how long do you think this has been going on? Preston asked, setting down the folder. I've been thinking about that. Looking back, the drowsiness after dinner started about 8 months ago. She claimed I was working too hard, needed better rest. Douglas ran his hands through his hair. I've been a fucking fool, Preston. No, you haven't. You've been a man in love who trusted his wife. But we need to figure out what she's really up to. Preston turned to his computer. Let's start with the basics. Victoria Gray. Run her background again, but deeper this time. As Preston typed, Douglas felt his phone vibrate. A text from Victoria. Hope you're sleeping well, darling. See you in the morning. She thinks I'm drugged and unconscious right now, Douglas muttered. Which means she might be conducting business at your house as we speak. Preston looked up from his screen. Doug, we've got a problem. Victoria Gray. There's no record of her before 5 years ago. No employment history, no criminal record, no educational background. It's like she didn't exist before she met you. The blood drained from Douglas's face. That's impossible. Identity theft. Professional grade. Preston continued typing. But here's the interesting part. I'm finding fragments of other identities. A Vivian Grant in Chicago disappeared after her husband died in a suspicious car accident. A Veronica Gibson in Miami vanished after her boyfriend, a police detective, died from an apparent heart attack. Douglas felt sick. How many? I'm finding traces of at least 7 different identities over the past 15 years, all targeting law enforcement or men in positions of authority. Preston's voice was grim. Doug, I think your wife is a professional black widow. Before Douglas could respond, Preston's computer chimed with an alert. We've got activity at your address. 3 vehicles just pulled into your driveway. Preston was already grabbing his jacket. We're going there now, but carefully. If she's as dangerous as this suggests, Emma could be in danger. During the drive to Douglas's house, Preston filled him in on what he'd discovered through deeper database searches. Victoria, or whatever her real name was, appeared to be running a sophisticated identity theft and fraud operation, targeting vulnerable people and using Douglas's reputation and home as her base of operations. The medical equipment company she claims to work for doesn't exist. The pharmaceutical sales job from before? Also fake. She's been living a complete lie, Doug. As they approached Douglas's neighborhood, Preston killed the headlights. 3 black SUVs were indeed parked in the driveway, and through the windows, they could see multiple figures moving around the living room. What's the plan? Douglas asked, his hand instinctively moving to where his service weapon used to be. We call for backup, and suddenly, Douglas's phone rang. Victoria. Answer it, Preston whispered. Act like you just woke up. Douglas answered, making his voice groggy. Victoria? What time is it? Oh good, you're awake. I'm sorry, honey. I know it's late, but I had to come home to grab some files for work. There are some colleagues with me. We'll be quiet. Go back to sleep. Through the phone, Douglas could hear voices in the background, and one of them was crying, a woman pleading for help. Okay, see you in the morning, Douglas managed, then hung up. Preston was already on his radio calling for backup. This is Detective Valencia. I need units for a possible kidnapping and fraud operation at 1247 Oakwood Drive. Multiple suspects, potentially armed, and civilians in danger. As they waited for backup, Douglas watched through binoculars as Victoria moved through his house, his home, directing what appeared to be some kind of criminal operation. The woman who'd shared his bed, who'd raised his daughter, who'd made him believe in love again, was a complete stranger. But as the rage built inside him, Douglas realized something else. She'd made a critical error. She'd kept him alive, thinking she could control him indefinitely. But now he knew the truth, and he had allies. Victoria thought she was the predator in this relationship. She was about to discover she'd been wrong all along. Chapter 4. The investigation begins. The raid on Douglas's house yielded more than anyone expected. By dawn, police had arrested Victoria and 4 accomplices, seized dozens of fake documents, rescued 3 kidnapping victims, and uncovered evidence of a criminal network spanning multiple states. Douglas sat in the police station's observation room, watching through one-way glass as detectives interrogated Victoria. Even in handcuffs, she maintained an icy composure, her legal training, which they'd now discovered was real, though obtained under a false identity, serving her well. I want my lawyer, she repeated for the 15th time, her voice devoid of the warmth he'd fallen in love with. Preston entered the observation room, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a thick case file. Emma's safe with my wife, Sarah, he said first, knowing Douglas's priority. And we've got enough evidence to put Victoria away for life, even if she never talks. Tell me everything you found. Preston opened the file, revealing photographs, documents, and evidence bags. Her real name is Vivian Carter. She's 39, not 36. She's been running this operation for over a decade, targeting law enforcement officers specifically because they make perfect covers for criminal activity. Douglas studied a photograph of Victoria, Vivian, from 15 years ago. Younger, harder, with the same calculating eyes he'd somehow missed during their relationship. The victims in your house were part of an identity theft ring, Preston continued. She'd kidnap people with good credit, force them to sign over their financial information, then sell their identities to criminals. The medical equipment business was a front for selling stolen prescription drugs. And the men she targeted before me? All dead. Heart attacks, car accidents, food poisoning. All ruled accidental or natural causes until now. Preston's jaw tightened. She's been slowly poisoning you too, Doug. The lab found traces of digitalis in your hair sample. Enough to make you drowsy and compliant, but administered in doses small enough to avoid detection. The revelation hit Douglas like a physical blow. She was planning to kill me. Eventually, yes. But first, she needed to access your network, your reputation, maybe even your pension and insurance. You were more valuable to her alive. Douglas stood and paced to the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky orange and red. His entire life for the past 5 years had been a lie. Worse, he brought danger into Emma's world. I want to talk to her. Doug, that's not a good idea. She's a master manipulator. I'm not going in there to be manipulated. I'm going in there to get information she hasn't given you yet. Douglas turned back to Preston, and his friend could see the cold determination that had made him such an effective detective. There's more to this, Preston. Victims, accomplices, ongoing operations. She won't talk to you, but she might talk to me. After an hour of arguing with prosecutors and police brass, Douglas was given permission for a supervised conversation with Victoria. He entered the interrogation room carrying a manila folder, his expression unreadable. Victoria looked up as he entered, and for a moment, her mask slipped. He saw surprise, then calculation, then something that might have been genuine regret. Hello, Douglas. Vivian. He sat across from her, noting how she flinched at the use of her real name. I have some questions. I imagine you do. She leaned back in her chair, studying him. You're angry. I'm past anger. I'm curious. Douglas opened the folder, revealing crime scene photos from the other cities where she'd operated. 7 dead men, Vivian. 7 families destroyed. I want to understand why. For the first time since her arrest, Victoria showed emotion. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at the photographs. You want to understand? Her voice was barely a whisper. I was 17 when I married my first husband. He was a police sergeant, 20 years older than me, and he nearly beat me to death on our honeymoon. When I tried to leave, his cop friends helped him track me down. They all thought it was funny, the young wife who couldn't handle marriage. Douglas kept his expression neutral, though something in her voice rang true. I learned then that men in power protect each other. They use their authority to hurt people weaker than them, and the system protects them. Her green eyes met his. So I decided to use their protection for my own purposes. By becoming a serial killer. By becoming a predator of predators. Victoria leaned forward. Every man I targeted was corrupt, Douglas. Check their records. Check their bank accounts. They were all dirty cops, taking bribes, covering up crimes, hurting innocent people. Douglas felt a chill run down his spine. And me? What was my crime? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I spent 6 months researching you before we met. I couldn't find anything dirty. You were clean, honest, respected. I thought that would make you the perfect cover. But somewhere along the way, I started to care about you. About Emma. Her voice cracked. I told myself I could keep you safe, that I could control everything. But the organization I work for doesn't allow for personal feelings. What organization? Victoria smiled sadly. Oh, Douglas, you think I'm a mastermind? I'm just an operative. There are dozens of women like me, all targeting different types of men in authority. We feed information up the chain, and they use it to blackmail politicians, judges, police commissioners. Douglas felt the bottom drop out of his world. Who's running it? Someone you'd never suspect. Someone who's been watching you specifically for years, even before I made contact. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Douglas, whatever you think this is, it's so much bigger. And now that you know, they'll come for Emma. Chapter 5. The Deeper Conspiracy. Douglas stormed out of the interrogation room, his mind reeling from Victoria's revelation. Preston was waiting in the hallway with Curtis Downs, a private investigator Douglas had worked with during his police days, a thin, wiry man with sharp eyes and an uncanny ability to uncover hidden connections. "Did you hear?" Douglas asked. "Every word," Preston confirmed. "If she's telling the truth about a larger organization, we're dealing with something way above our pay grade." Curtis stepped forward, holding a tablet loaded with financial records and surveillance photos. "I've been digging into Victoria's background since last night. She's right about one thing. This goes deep. I found payments flowing from shell companies in 3 different countries, all ultimately traced to a domestic operation." Douglas studied the financial charts on Curtis's tablet. "How domestic?" "Local domestic. Someone in this city has been running a blackmail and corruption network for at least a decade, using women like Victoria to compromise law enforcement and political figures." Curtis swiped to a new screen showing surveillance photos. "And I think I know who." The image on the screen made Douglas's blood freeze. Judge Ramona Draper, a woman he'd respected for years, someone who'd presided over many of his cases with fairness and integrity. She was pictured meeting with several men Douglas recognized as police commissioners and federal agents. Judge Draper. Douglas couldn't hide his disbelief. "That's impossible. She's one of the most honest judges in the state." "Perfect cover," Curtis replied. "Who would suspect a female judge of running a criminal empire? She's been using her position to gather intelligence on law enforcement personnel, identifying targets for her operatives." Victoria was just one of many. Preston was already on his phone with the FBI. If a sitting judge is involved, this becomes a federal case. "We need to move fast before she realizes Victoria's been compromised." But Douglas was thinking ahead, his strategic mind working through the implications. "No, if we go federal now, she'll have allies in the system who will warn her. She's had years to place people in key positions. So what do you suggest?" Douglas turned to Curtis. "How much evidence do you have that would stand up in court?" "Honestly, not enough. Financial records can be explained away, and the surveillance photos only show meetings, not criminal activity. We need someone from the inside to provide testimony or evidence. Then we need to make Victoria talk more. But not here." Douglas looked at both men. "I have an idea, but it's going to require us to break some rules." 2 hours later, Douglas sat in the passenger seat of Curtis's surveillance van, parked outside the courthouse where Judge Draper was hearing cases. They'd managed to convince the prosecutor to transfer Victoria to a minimum security holding facility, ostensibly for her safety, but actually to give Douglas more access to her. "There," Curtis pointed to a black sedan pulling up to the courthouse. "That's Draper's personal assistant, Sylvia Kelly. But look who's with her." Douglas focused his binoculars on the car. 3 men in expensive suits were emerging with Sylvia, men he recognized as defense attorneys who specialized in getting criminals reduced sentences. "They're meeting with Draper during a break," Curtis observed. "This is it, Doug. This is how she operates. She uses her position to coordinate with corrupt lawyers and law enforcement, managing cases to benefit her network." Douglas's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We have Emma. Stop your investigation or she dies." His heart stopped. Preston was supposed to be watching Emma at his house with his wife. Douglas immediately called Preston, his hands shaking as he dialed. "Preston, is Emma safe?" "She's right here, Doug, playing video games with my daughter." "Why? Check on her. Physically check on her right now." He heard Preston moving, then talking to his wife, then a pause that lasted forever. "Doug, she's here. She's safe." "What's going on?" Douglas stared at the text message, his detective mind analyzing. "It's a psychological attack. They're trying to scare me into backing down, which means we're close." Curtis was monitoring police radio frequencies on his equipment. "Doug, we've got a problem. There's been a break-in at the evidence facility where they're holding Victoria's case files. 3 men, heavily armed, specifically targeted her records. They're destroying evidence and trying to intimidate me at the same time." Douglas felt his anger crystallizing into cold determination. "Which means we're not just close, we're right on target." His phone buzzed again. "Last warning. Walk away or lose everything." Douglas looked at the message, then at the courthouse where Judge Draper was destroying lives while appearing to uphold justice. He thought about Victoria's victims, about the corruption infecting his city, about the danger his daughter faced as long as these people remained in power. He turned to Curtis. "How do you feel about illegal surveillance?" Curtis grinned. "I feel like I'm about to become temporarily deaf and blind to whatever you're planning." "Good, because we're going to give Judge Draper exactly what she doesn't expect." Douglas pulled out his phone and began dialing a number he hadn't called in years. "We're going to fight dirty." Chapter 6, Planning the Trap. That evening, Douglas stood in the abandoned warehouse that Curtis used for his most sensitive investigations. The space was filled with surveillance equipment, computers, and 3 people Douglas trusted with his life: Preston, Curtis, and Austin Bartlett, a former Army intelligence officer turned cybersecurity expert who owed Douglas a favor from his police days. Austin, a stocky man with prematurely gray hair and intense dark eyes, was typing furiously on multiple keyboards while speaking rapid-fire technical jargon. "I've hacked into Judge Draper's personal communication systems. Email, phone records, even her home security system. She's been very busy since Victoria's arrest." He pulled up a series of recorded phone calls on his main screen. "Listen to this from 3 hours ago." Judge Draper's voice filled the warehouse. "The situation is contained, but we need to accelerate the timeline. Eliminate the detective and his daughter. Make it look like a murder-suicide. Victoria knows too much to be left alive. Arrange an accident at the holding facility." Douglas felt his jaw clench. They weren't just trying to intimidate him. They were planning to kill him and Emma. "There's more," Austin continued. "I found encrypted communications between Draper and at least 12 other officials. Police commissioners, federal agents, even a state senator. This network has been operating for 15 years, blackmailing and controlling key figures throughout the state." Preston studied the evidence on the screens. "We have enough to bring down the whole network, but if we go through official channels, they'll know we're coming. They have people everywhere." Curtis spread out architectural plans of several buildings on a table. "So we don't go through official channels. We extract Victoria, get her full testimony on record, and then we leverage Judge Draper into confessing by threatening to expose her entire network." "Extract Victoria?" Douglas looked at the plans. "You mean break her out of holding?" "Temporarily. Austin's already confirmed that they're planning to kill her tonight. We either get her out alive, or we lose our key witness." Austin turned from his computers. "I can disable the security systems and create electronic alibis for all of us. As far as any official record will show, you'll all be in different locations when Victoria mysteriously disappears from custody." Douglas studied the extraction plan Curtis had designed. It was risky, illegal, and would make them all fugitives if it went wrong. But it was also their only chance to save Victoria and expose the corruption that had infected his city. "What about Emma?" "Already handled," Preston said. "My wife Sarah is taking both girls to her sister's cabin upstate. They'll be completely off the grid until this is over." Douglas looked around at his allies, men who were risking their careers and freedom to help him fight a system that had been corrupted from within. "If we do this, there's no going back. We'll be operating outside the law. Sometimes that's the only way to enforce justice," Curtis replied grimly. Austin pulled up a new screen showing Judge Draper's schedule. "She has a private meeting tomorrow at 8 p.m. in her chambers with several key figures in her network. If we can get Victoria's testimony and evidence of their conspiracy, we can confront them all at once." "A trap," Douglas realized. "We're going to trap the entire network." "Exactly. But first, we need to keep Victoria alive long enough to talk." Curtis checked his watch. "The assassination attempt is scheduled for 2 a.m. We move at 1:30. As the men continued planning, Douglas felt a familiar sensation. The adrenaline rush of a major case breaking open, the satisfaction of pieces falling into place. But this time, it was personal. They'd threatened his daughter, destroyed his trust, and corrupted the system he'd spent his career defending. Judge Draper and her network thought they were untouchable, protected by their positions and their careful manipulation of the system. They were about to learn that some men couldn't be bought, intimidated, or controlled. Douglas looked at his watch. 11 p.m. In 3.5 hours, They would either save Victoria and begin dismantling a criminal empire, or they would all become fugitives from the law they'd sworn to uphold. Either way, this war was just beginning. Chapter 7. The Extraction. At 1:25 a.m., Douglas crouched in the shadows outside the minimum security holding facility, wearing all black and communicating through earpieces with his team. Austin had successfully disabled the electronic security systems, while Curtis monitored police frequencies from his van. Guards are making their rounds every 15 minutes, Preston whispered from his position by the side entrance. Next gap is in 3 minutes. Through his earpiece, Douglas heard Austin's voice. I'm watching the facility's internal cameras. 2 guards in the main building, one making coffee in the break room, the other doing paperwork. Victoria's in cell block C, 3rd door on the right. Douglas checked his watch. According to Austin's intelligence, the assassination team would arrive at 2 a.m., 35 minutes from now. They had to be in and out before then. Moving, Douglas whispered, slipping through the side entrance Preston had unlocked. The hallway was dimly lit and eerily quiet. Douglas moved with the stealth he'd learned during his police training, his soft-soled shoes silent on the linoleum floor. He reached cell block C and found Victoria sitting on her narrow bunk, staring at the wall. She looked up as he approached, showing no surprise. I wondered when you'd come. We need to go. Now. Douglas used Curtis's lock-picking tools to open her cell. There's an assassination team coming for you in 30 minutes. Victoria stood slowly, studying his face. You believe me now? About the organization? I believe you're the only person who can help me destroy them. Douglas handed her civilian clothes Curtis had provided. Change quickly. We'll talk somewhere safe. As Victoria changed clothes, Douglas heard Austin's voice in his earpiece. Problem. The assassination team just arrived early. 3 vehicles, at least 9 men, heavily armed. They're breaching the main entrance now. Shit, Douglas muttered. Preston, we need that emergency exit clear. Already on it, Preston replied. Curtis, start the van. We're coming out hot. Douglas grabbed Victoria's arm. We're leaving now. Stay close and do exactly what I say. They moved quickly toward the emergency exit, but Douglas could hear shouting and gunfire from the main building. The assassination team wasn't trying to be subtle. They were planning to kill everyone in the facility and blame it on a gang attack. This way, Douglas guided Victoria through a series of corridors toward Preston's position. They burst through the emergency exit just as Preston waved them toward Curtis's van. But as they ran across the parking lot, spotlights suddenly blazed from 3 directions, and armed men emerged from the shadows. Freeze! Federal agents. But Douglas's trained eye immediately spotted the problem. These weren't federal agents. Their equipment was military grade, but their positioning and tactics were those of mercenaries, not law enforcement. Run! Douglas shoved Victoria toward the van as gunfire erupted around them. Preston returned fire with his service weapon, while Curtis gunned the van's engine. Douglas reached the vehicle and dove through the open door, pulling Victoria with him as bullets shattered the rear window. Go, 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 Preston shouted, leaping into the passenger seat as Curtis floored the accelerator. They raced through the empty streets while Austin guided them through his hacked traffic system, changing lights in their favor and disabling speed cameras. Safe house is 10 minutes away, Curtis called back to Douglas. But they'll be looking for this van. We need to switch vehicles. Douglas looked at Victoria, who was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, but otherwise unharmed. Are you ready to tell us everything? No more games, no more half-truths. Victoria nodded, her composure finally cracking. Judge Draper isn't just running a blackmail operation. She's selling classified information to foreign governments, using compromised law enforcement officials to gather intelligence on national security operations. Jesus, Preston muttered. This isn't just corruption, it's treason. There's more, Victoria continued. Tomorrow's meeting isn't about local operations. They're finalizing the sale of federal surveillance data to a hostile foreign power. The buyer is paying $50 million for information that could compromise undercover agents worldwide. Douglas felt the weight of the revelation. They weren't just fighting local corruption. They were trying to stop an act of treason that could get American agents killed. Curtis pulled into an abandoned parking garage where Austin was waiting with a different vehicle. "We need to contact federal authorities," he said as they transferred to the new car. "No," Douglas said firmly. "Victoria's right about how deep this goes. We can't trust anyone in an official capacity until we know who's compromised." "So what's the plan?" Preston asked. Douglas looked at his watch. 2:47 a.m. Judge Draper's meeting was in 17 hours. "We're going to that meeting tomorrow night. All of us. And we're going to record everything." "That's suicide," Austin protested. "They'll have security, multiple escape routes. Not if they don't know we're coming." Douglas turned to Victoria. "You're going to contact Draper and tell her you escaped, that you have information she needs. Request a private meeting before the main gathering. She'll suspect a trap. Maybe. But she'll also be desperate to know what you told the police. Her arrogance will make her take the risk." Douglas smiled grimly. "That's when we spring our own trap." Victoria looked at each of the men who had risked everything to save her life. "If we do this, some of us won't survive. Draper's network includes people trained to kill. Then we better make sure we're the ones left standing," Douglas replied. As Austin drove them toward the safe house, Douglas stared out at the city lights and thought about Emma, sleeping safely in a cabin hundreds of miles away. By tomorrow night, either she would have a father who had helped expose one of the largest treason cases in American history, or she would be an orphan. The war was about to reach its climax. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. At 7:45 p.m. the next evening, Douglas crouched in the ventilation system above Judge Draper's chambers, every muscle tense as he listened to Austin's voice through his nearly invisible earpiece. "All recording devices are active. Curtis has the building surrounded with backup recording equipment. Preston's in position at the emergency stairwell. Victoria should be making contact any moment." Below, Douglas could see Judge Draper pacing nervously in her ornate chambers. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and sharp features, someone who had built a reputation for fairness and integrity while secretly selling out her country. The chamber door opened, and Victoria entered. She looked exactly like the pharmaceutical representative Douglas had fallen in love with, professional, confident, and completely convincing. "Ramona," Victoria said, using Judge Draper's first name with familiar ease. "Thank you for seeing me." "Vivian," Judge Draper's voice was cold. "You were supposed to be dead hours ago. Imagine my surprise when you called. Your assassination team was incompetent. But that's not why I'm here." Victoria sat down across from Draper's desk. "I need to know how much the detective knows." Douglas felt a moment of doubt. Was Victoria playing him, even now? "More than we'd like," Draper replied. "His friend Preston Valencia has been asking questions, and they've connected you to some of our other operations. We're accelerating tonight's schedule. The foreign sale, $50 million for comprehensive surveillance data on federal operations. Our buyer wants everything: agent identities, operational plans, surveillance technologies." Draper smiled coldly. "Enough money to disappear permanently." Douglas activated the signal device Austin had given him, alerting his team that the confession was being recorded. Victoria leaned forward. "What about Douglas and his daughter? Both will die tonight. Murder-suicide, very tragic." The detective couldn't handle learning about his wife's criminal activities. Draper checked her watch. "The others will arrive in 10 minutes. We'll complete the sale, then eliminate all loose ends." "Including me?" "Especially you. You were supposed to maintain control over the detective, not fall in love with him. Emotions make you unreliable." That's when Douglas knew for certain that Victoria's feelings for him had been real. She had risked everything to help expose this conspiracy. Victoria's voice hardened. "I want out, Ramona. Complete immunity and enough money to disappear." "Of course, dear." Draper opened her desk drawer. "I've prepared your severance package." She pulled out a pistol and aimed it at Victoria. "Goodbye, Vivian." Douglas dropped through the ceiling tiles, landing hard on Draper's desk and knocking the gun from her hands. At the same time, Preston burst through the main door, and Austin's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Building is secured. Recording everything." Judge Draper stumbled backward, her composure finally cracking. You don't understand what you're interfering with. This is bigger than some local corruption case. We know exactly what it is, Douglas said, advancing on her. Treason. Selling federal intelligence to foreign powers. How many American agents are going to die because of information you sold? Before Draper could answer, the chamber door exploded inward. 4 men in tactical gear stormed in, weapons drawn. But instead of pointing them at Douglas and his team, they aimed at Judge Draper. Federal agents, the lead man announced. Judge Ramona Draper, you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and espionage. Douglas looked confused until one of the agents removed his helmet, revealing the face of FBI agent Guy Hess, someone Douglas had worked with years ago on federal cases. Agent Hess, how did you? We've been tracking this network for 2 years, Hess explained. When we heard about your wife's arrest, we realized you might be our way in. We've been monitoring your communications since yesterday. Victoria stepped forward. I've been working undercover for the FBI for 3 years. My assignment was to infiltrate Draper's network and gather evidence. Douglas felt the world spinning again. Your FBI? Special Agent Vivian Carter, yes. Everything about our relationship was real, Douglas. But I couldn't tell you the truth without compromising the investigation. Preston looked between Douglas and Victoria. So, the drugging, the criminal activities in his house. All part of my cover. The drugs were harmless sleep aids that made Douglas think he was being sedated. The criminal activities were FBI sting operations designed to gather evidence on Draper's network. Judge Draper laughed bitterly from where she sat in handcuffs. You think you've won? There are 12 more networks like mine operating throughout the country. You've barely scratched the surface. Agent Hess smiled grimly. Actually, we've been simultaneously raiding all 12 networks tonight. Your operation was the last one. As the FBI agents led Judge Draper away, Douglas stood alone with Victoria in the destroyed chamber. The woman he'd loved, lost, and fought to save was staring at him with the same green eyes he'd fallen for 5 years ago. So what happens now? He asked. Now I have to testify in federal court, help prosecute a treason case that will probably take years to complete. Victoria stepped closer to him and hoped that somewhere in all of this, there's still a chance for us. Douglas looked at her, really looked at her, seeing both the woman he'd loved and the federal agent who had risked everything to protect national security. Emma, he said suddenly, does she know? She knows Mommy has an important job that sometimes requires pretending to be someone else. She thinks it's like being a superhero with a secret identity. Victoria smiled. She's not wrong. Douglas felt the pieces of his world slowly reassembling into a new configuration. Not the same as before, but perhaps something even stronger. We'll need to start over, he said. New foundation, complete honesty. I'd like that, Victoria replied. If you'll have me. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Douglas sat in a federal courthouse, watching Victoria testify against the last member of Judge Draper's network. The prosecution had been methodical and thorough, dismantling 15 years of corruption and foreign espionage with evidence that Victoria's undercover work had provided. Emma, now 9 years old, sat beside him in the gallery, quietly drawing pictures while the adults talked about complicated legal matters. She'd adapted to learning that her mother was Agent Victoria rather than just Mommy Victoria, treating it like an exciting adventure rather than a betrayal. Preston, who had been commended by the FBI for his assistance in the case, leaned over and whispered, "That's the last one. Draper and her entire network are looking at life in prison." The federal prosecutor called for a recess, and Victoria made her way over to where Douglas and Emma were sitting. She looked exhausted but relieved. The testimony phase was finally ending. "How are my 2 favorite people?" she asked, sitting down beside Emma and ruffling her hair. "I drew Agent Mommy fighting bad guys," Emma announced, holding up her picture. It showed a stick-figure woman with long hair facing off against multiple dark figures, with a badge clearly visible on her chest. "It's perfect," Victoria said, and Douglas could see genuine emotion in her eyes. As the courthouse emptied around them, Douglas thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. The investigation had revealed that Victoria's assignment had been to infiltrate Draper's network by targeting Douglas specifically. His reputation and position made him an ideal cover identity for an undercover agent. But somewhere during those 5 years of living together, raising Emma, and building what felt like a real family, the assignment had become genuine. Victoria had fallen in love with both Douglas and Emma, making her job exponentially more difficult and dangerous. "What happens now?" Douglas asked, the same question he'd posed 6 months earlier. "Now I get transferred to a desk job in the white-collar crime division," Victoria replied. "No more undercover work, no more assumed identities. Just Agent Victoria Carter, financial fraud investigator. And us." Victoria looked at him with the same vulnerable expression she'd worn during their first conversation after her arrest. "That depends on whether you can forgive me for lying to you for 5 years, even if it was for a good cause." Douglas had spent months thinking about this question. He'd lost trust, gained it back, lost it again, and slowly rebuilt it through countless conversations, therapy sessions, and gradual revelations of truth. "I think," he said slowly, "that I can forgive an FBI agent for doing her job to protect national security, especially since that agent risked her life to save mine and exposed one of the largest treason conspiracies in American history." Emma looked up from her drawing. "Does this mean we're a family again?" Douglas and Victoria looked at each other, then at the little girl who had been through more upheaval in the past year than most adults experience in a lifetime. "Yeah, Princess," Douglas said. "We're a family." 3 months later, Douglas stood in his backyard, watching Victoria teach Emma how to throw a proper punch, part of the practical life skills education that came with having an FBI agent for a mother. Preston and his family were there for a barbecue, along with Curtis and Austin, who had become regular fixtures in their lives. The house was the same one where Douglas had been unknowingly drugged, where he'd lived with a woman whose identity was completely false. But somehow, it felt different now. Cleaner, more honest, like sunlight had finally reached corners that had been dark for too long. Victoria walked over to where Douglas was manning the grill, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how much has changed." Douglas turned in her arms. "A year ago, I thought I was married to a pharmaceutical sales representative named Victoria Gray. Now I'm engaged to FBI Special Agent Vivian Carter. Do you miss the pharmaceutical sales representative?" Douglas considered the question seriously. "I miss the simplicity, but I prefer the truth. Even when the truth is more complicated, especially when the truth is more complicated." Douglas kissed her forehead. "Besides, how many guys can say their fiancé helped take down a treason conspiracy?" Emma ran over to them, breathless from her self-defense lesson. "Daddy, Agent Mommy says I can start learning martial arts." "Of course she did," Douglas said, shooting Victoria an amused look. As the evening wound down and their friends headed home, the three of them sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. It was peaceful in a way that Douglas's life hadn't been for years. "I have something to tell you both," Victoria said suddenly. Douglas felt a familiar twist of anxiety. "What kind of something?" "The good kind." Victoria smiled. "The FBI has offered me a position training new undercover agents. It's based here in the city, completely above board, no secret identities required." "That sounds perfect," Douglas said, feeling the last piece of their new life clicking into place. Emma jumped up excitedly. "Does that mean no more pretending to be different people?" "Well," Victoria said, pulling her daughter close, "I'll always be whoever you need me to be. But yes, no more secret identities." As they sat together in the growing darkness, Douglas reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. He'd started the year thinking he was living a perfect life with a perfect family, only to discover it was all an illusion built on lies and criminal activity. But from the ashes of that illusion, they'd built something real, messier, more complicated, but infinitely more honest. Victoria was still the woman he'd fallen in love with, just with more layers, more strength, and more courage than he'd ever imagined. Emma was still his princess, but now she was a princess who knew that sometimes the people we love have to fight monsters to protect the people they care about. And Douglas was still a man who believed in justice. But now he knew that sometimes justice required operating outside the system, trusting your instincts, and fighting for the people you love even when the odds seemed impossible. "I love you both," he said quietly, pulling his family closer. "We love you too," Victoria replied. "To infinity and beyond," Emma added, quoting her favorite movie. Douglas looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky and smiled. They'd traveled a long, difficult road to get to this moment of peace, but it had been worth every mile. The war was over. They'd won. And now, finally, they could focus on the most important battle of all, building a life together based on truth, trust, and love. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.